going to begin with Kim Edwards. Kim grew up in New York in the heart of the Finger Lakes region. I did read somewhere, though, that she was born in Texas, and so she moved across country to do her growing up. If you've read her novel, The Lake of Dreams, you know that landscape where she grew up, because the landscape is so penetrating and beautiful in the novel. I will just read her brief bio. She's the oldest of 4 children, graduated from Colgate University and the University of Iowa, where she received an MFA in fiction and an MA in linguistics. And I remember when I first met Kim, and I thought, oh, she's got her MFA, she's probably just gone straight into writing and that's it. But no, she and her husband took off to Asia to teach English as a second language over there as they were traveling. And of course, yes, she did continue to write. And out of her time in Asia came the short stories that were gathered into her collection, Secrets of the Fire King, which is one of my favorite books. It's a book in which I first was introduced to her. And she was very successful with those stories. They're luminous stories, they're radiant, they're hard-edged, and the images in them are unforgettable. So she quickly began to win awards with those stories, the Nelson Algren Award. Her book, The Secrets of the Fire Kings, was shortlisted for the 1998 Penn Hemingway Award. It will be reissued, or it has been reissued now by Penguin. And so Kim was on her way, even though she was far away from her home grounds. We were lucky enough that she ended up back here for us in Kentucky, and is now at UK. She has taught also in the MFA program at Warren Wilson and at Washington University. Her novel, which most of you know, I'm sure, The Memory Keeper's Daughter, was a Barnes & Noble Discovery Award winner and won the Kentucky Literary Award for Fiction in 2005. It was a #1 bestseller in the New York Times list in paperback, which was a wonderful thing, a true word-of-mouth success, which is a great tribute to her as a writer. One of the things that I like the best and admire the most about Kim is her warmth and accessibility to other writers, her encouragement of other writers, and that's exemplified by an open letter that she has on her Amazon page that I went to and read. And the story of how Lake of Dreams came to be is an inspiring story for those of us who want to finish that story that keeps nagging at us in the back of our heads that we think we're going to get to someday. So I'm going to quote from her open letter to her readers as a way to conclude my introduction. The Lake of Dreams is a book I've been imagining for a long time. Years ago, I wrote a 400-page draft of a different novel that had some of these same thematic concerns, including a complex family history, the importance of the land, and the comet connecting generations. That early novel ended up in a box in my basement, as so many first novels do, though I did return to it from time to time, and once I even made it 200 pages into another version before I put it aside again. Meanwhile, she finished her story collection, The Secrets of a Fire King, and wrote Memory Keeper's Daughter. Yet the essence of that earlier story persisted, and shortly after Memory Keeper's Daughter was finished, but before it was published, she started writing The Lake of Dreams. Those earlier discarded drafts had finally brought me to the heart of the story, and this time I had the voice, which is always the crucial discovery. So I would like to welcome Kim here among us and her voice, which we will be happy to hear.
Thank you so much, Letha, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight on this rainy night. I'm so glad to be here. It's good to be in Lexington. It's always so good to be at the Carnegie Center, so thanks to everyone here for hosting this great event. I just wanted, before I start to read, I wanted to show you, I just got back from book tours in Brazil and Italy for The Lake of Dreams. This is the Italian cover. I just think it's so beautiful. And the title they changed is called I'm not going to try the Italian because I would butcher it, but it means one day you will find me. And so I just wanted to share that since I'm just back from those tours. I'm going to read a little bit from the Lake of Dreams tonight. And some of you may have heard a couple of the segments that I'm going to read, but please bear with me because I'm going to read something that I have never read before tonight. And so if you've heard the pieces that I'm going to read, please be patient. I'm sorry for the repetition. It's hard to read from this novel because it unfolds something like a mystery. And so I can't give away too much. I have to be careful about what I read. But as Letha mentioned, The Lake of Dreams begins with a comet. The story is the story of Lucy Jarrett, who's about 30 when the novel opens. But as I was conceiving of The Lake of Dreams, I understood that it was a quest story. And in quest stories, the hero, or the heroine in this case, always discovers something in the world, but always in that discovery takes an inward journey too. So the story of The Lake of Dreams is Lucy's story, but the story she discovers is a story from the past that shapes her and changes her and allows her to live differently at the novel's conclusion. And I'll come back to Lucy in a minute. But I'm going to start at first with reading the prologue of the book, which is a glimpse of the past, the family past that Lucy discovers, a segment of the past that she didn't ever know existed, a part of the family story that was excised and left out. And this is the night of Halley's Comet in 1910 in England, and a character that Lucy will come to know in the course of her discoveries in the book. Although it is nearly midnight, an unusual light slips through a crack in the wool, brushing her arm like the feathers of a wing. In the next room, her parents sleep, and the darkened village is silent. But she has lain awake all these hours, and now she climbs out of bed, the floorboards rough against her feet. For weeks, people have talked of nothing but the comet, how the earth will pass through clouds of poison vapors in its tail, how the world could end. She is 15, and all day she and her brother help seal the house, windows, doors, even the chimney, with thick black wool, hammers tapping everywhere, as their neighbors did the same. The narrow triangle of strange light touches her here, then there, as she crosses the room. She is wearing her blue dress, almost outgrown, the worn cotton soft against her skin. In this room, a low space over the shop that is hers alone, the wool is only loosely fastened to the window, and when she yanks a corner, the cloth falls away, pale comet light swimming all around. She pushes the window open and takes a breath, one, and then another, deeper. Nothing happens. No poison gas, no searing lungs, only the watery spring, the sense of growing things, and distantly, the sea. And this odd light. The constellations are as familiar as the lines on her own palms, so she does not have to search to find the comet. It soars high, a streaming jewel, circling the years, thrilling and portentous. Distantly a dog barks, and the children's rustle and complain in their coops. Soft voices rise, mingling, her brother's and another, one she knows. Her heart quickens with anger and yearning both. She hesitates. She has not planned this moment, the turning point of her life it will become. Yet it is also no impulse that pulls her onto the window ledge, her bare feet dangling a few yards above the garden. She is dressed, after all. She left the wool loose on purpose. All day she has been dreaming of the comet, its wild and fiery beauty, what it might mean, and how her life might change. The voices rise, and then she leaps. So at this point, the novel moves to Lucy, moves back to the contemporary story. And as the novel opens, Lucy Jarrett is living in Japan. She's left her hometown, which is called the Lake of Dreams, which, as Letha said, is set in the area in which I grew up, a landscape that I love. She left there shortly after she graduated from high school. And it was the summer also that her father drowned in a boating accident that's never been fully explained. And for various reasons, Lucy has not been back to the Lake of Dreams. She's taken a series of increasingly exotic and interesting jobs that have taken her abroad, and she's been living in Asia. And as the novel opens, for the first time in her life, she's nearly 30, she's for the first time in her life unemployed. And so she's kind of got this stillness in her life suddenly. She's been in constant motion, really, since she left the Lake of Dreams. But in this stillness, things are starting to surface from the past. And I lived in Japan for 2 years, and one of the things I did in the opening of this book very deliberately was I used the earthquakes that I experienced when I was living in Japan as a kind of metaphor. I lived there for a summer. There was a lot of actually volcanic activity. There was a kind of island being formed in the bay outside the city where I lived, and it was very unsettling. And it seemed to me a wonderful metaphor to use at the opening of this book. Of course, I wrote this book before the terrible earthquake that happened in just last spring. And so I've been feeling really, I've had mixed feelings about having used that as a metaphor. But last week, in the Morris bookstore actually, I found a collection of stories by Haruki Murakami, which is called After the Quake. And it is stories that are, all the collection of stories in which all the characters in the different stories, a very diverse group of characters, are responding emotionally to the events of the 1995 earthquake in Kobe. So I felt a little bit better. My heart has really been with the people of Japan since that terrible event. So I'm just going to read the opening of Lucy in Japan, and then I'll move on to a piece that no one has ever heard before. My name is Lucy Jarrett, and before I knew about the girl in the window, before I went home and stumbled on the fragments and began to piece the story back together, I found myself living in a village near the sea in Japan. It had been a spring of little earthquakes, and that night I woke abruptly, jarred from a dream. Footsteps faded in the cobblestone lane, and distant trains rumbled. I listened harder until I could make out the surge of the sea, but that was all. Yoshi's hand rested on my hip lightly, as if we were still dancing, which we'd been doing earlier in the evening, music from the radio soft in the dark kitchen, our steps slowing until we stopped altogether and stood kissing in the jasmine air. I lay back down, curving toward his warmth. In the dream, I'd gone back to the lake where I'd grown up. I didn't want to go, but I did. The sky was overcast, the faded green cabin, which I'd seen before, but only in dreams, musty and overhung with trees. Its windows were cracked, opaque with dust and snow. I walked past it to the shore, walked out onto the thick, translucent ice. I walked until I came to them. So many people living their lives just beneath the surface. I caught them in glimpses, fell to my knees, pressed my palms against the glassy surface, so thick, so clear, so cold. I'd put them there, somehow I knew that. I'd left them for so long. Their hair stirred in underwater currents, and their eyes, when they met mine, were full of a longing that matched my own. The window shades were trembling. I tensed, caught between the earthquake and the dream, but it was just a distant train fading into the mountains. Every night for a week I'd had this same dream, stirred up by the shifting earth, stirring up the past. It took me back to a night when I was 17, wild and restless, sliding off the back of Keegan Falls' motorcycle, apple blossoms as pale as stars above us. I fanned my fingers against Keegan's chest before he left, the engine ripping through the night. My father was in the garden when I turned toward the house. Moonlight caught the gray in his short hair. The tip of his cigarette burned, rising, falling. Lilacs and early roses floated in the darkness. "Nice of you to show up," my father said. "I'm sorry you were worried," I told him. A silence. The sense of lake water and compost and green shoots splitting open the dark earth. And then he said, "Want to go fishing with me, Lucy? How about it? It's been a long time." His words were wistful, and I remembered getting up before dawn to meet him, struggling to carry the tackle box as we crossed the lawn to the boat. I wanted to go fishing, to accept my father's invitation, but I wanted more to go back upstairs and think about Keegan Fall. I was 17, and I turned away, and in a tone as sharp as broken shells, I said, "Dad, really, I'm hardly little anymore." Those were the last words I ever spoke to him. Hours later, waking to sunlight and urgent voices, I ran downstairs and across the dew-struck lawn to the shore, where they had pulled my father from the lake. My mother was kneeling in the shallow water, touching his cheek with her fingertips. His lips and skin were bluish. There were traces of foam in the corner of his mouth, and his eyelids were oddly iridescent. Like a fish, I thought. A crazy thought, but at least it silenced the other thoughts, which were worse and which have never left me. If I'd gone, if I'd been there, if only I'd said yes. So Lucy goes back. She gets a call from her mother, actually she gets an email from her mother about her mother's been in a minor accident, and nothing serious, but Lucy is unsettled in her relationship with Yoshi, who's mentioned here. She's unemployed, as I said, and she knows that there are things that she has to address from her past. So she goes back to the Lake of Dreams, and early in her stay there, in the big old house on the lake that has belonged to her family for generations, she finds in a cupboard up in the cupola of the house a collection of pamphlets that have to do with the suffragist movement, which took place in that area, which began in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York, close to where the novel is set. And amid those pamphlets, she finds scraps of letters that suggest that there's this ancestor I've mentioned before who has been excised from the family stories, and suggests a kind of a scandal that has kept her from being included. And Lucy understands in some deep intuitive level that this piece of the family history is important for her to resolve, to understand something about herself, her own life, and the mysteries of the death of her father. And so she goes on this quest, as I mentioned, to try to find more about this ancestor, and she does, along the way, come across some clues in stained glass windows, in archives, and eventually she begins to discover letters. And I'm going to read just a portion of a letter from this ancestor we met in the prologue. Before I read, since there are so many people in the room who write and who love writing and who struggle, as all writers do, with writing, I wanted to talk a little bit about how this character came to be in the novel. When I started the book, I had only Lucy, and I thought it would be Lucy's story and that the novel would turn on the mystery of the death and Lucy's unresolved feelings of guilt and grief. But as I started writing, I kept having this, I was about 60 pages into the book, and I kept having this other voice, telling this other story that I felt like was very intrusive. And so at some point I decided, okay, enough of this. I'm just going to write this other voice down so it will stop bothering me, and then I'll get back to Lucy. But of course, as I started to write this other voice, it became very compelling, and I realized that it was really the other half of the novel, that the two voices were intricately connected. And so I really think the lesson is just to always be open to listen to this, your subconscious, or the quiet voices that persist, and always be open to a direction in the story that you don't necessarily intellectually intend. This is a letter from the woman whose name is Rose, written to her daughter. Dear Iris, beautiful girl, when I left this morning you were in the garden, making a pile from the gravel by the fish pond, wearing a dark yellow dress I made for you. You are only 3 years old, and you are so smart. You pulled the petals from an orange marigold and scattered them on the water, feeding the fish, you said. I held you very close. Your hair, like dandelion fluff when you were small, lies flat now, so smooth and shiny. You smelled like soap and sunshine. Then Mrs. Elliot arrived, and Cora called you inside for lunch. You climbed the steps one by one. They are too tall for your little legs. You turned, laughing, to wave to me, and then you disappeared beyond the door. Mrs. Elliot called me to hurry, but I could not. I kept looking at the porch, willing you there, but you did not come. I used yellow ribbons on your dress. I have one tied around my wrist. It flashes beneath my cuff as I write. The other passengers don't notice. They go on with their business. They seem very ordinary, and I wonder if I seem that way myself. It makes me wonder what secrets they carry in their hearts. The old woman across from me, who gazes out the window, what is she remembering? Or the gentleman beside me adding numbers in his ledger, or the young farmer and his wife exclaiming at the sights. What are their secrets, their dreams? I am dressed plainly, my one suit, brown, a blouse the color of goldenrod. I sit quietly with my satchel at my feet. What do they see, looking at me? They could never imagine you, turning, laughing, to wave one last time at the stairs. You did not know that I was leaving. It is better that way, I tell myself again and again. I promise I will come back for you soon. Meanwhile, I will write every day. Maybe you will never read these letters. Maybe I will be back so quickly that you will not remember I was ever gone. Still, I will write. Someday, when you are older, you'll have these to keep and see how much I loved you, even though today you woke up from your nap, stretching in that patch of sunlight that falls across the bed in mid-afternoon to find me gone. They'll take good care of you, I pray. Despite the scandal, Joseph loves you because he loved your father, and Cora, though she does not like me, dotes on children since she has none of her own. At the station, Mrs. Elliott gave me a poem. She'd copied it from a magazine, a poem for travelers, she said. The poet is a woman, but she's called only H.D. Mrs. Elliott always says I am thirsty for words, and she gives me books. I read this poem again and again. Wind rushes over the dunes, and the coarse, salt-crusted grass answers. I do not understand that, really, and yet the words express a sadness that I feel. Iris, I named you for the flowers. They are the color of your father's eyes. This is the story I want you to know. Your uncle cannot tell you because he doesn't understand. Also, he would begin with the Comet, which is the wrong place to start. Thank you.